A series of attacks in Nigeria's Benue state have left hundreds of people dead in the past few days. But it's not new. The conflict between farmers and herders has been going on for decades. So how can the country break this cycle of violence? Data from armed conflict locations shows that Nigeria has the highest number of farmer and herder deaths in West and Central Africa over the past decade. More than 15,000 deaths have been recorded since 2010, and half of those have occurred since 2018. These attacks are often fueled by ethnic or religious differences, but economic shifts, population growth, and climate change have stoked the fire. Benue State is in Nigeria's middle belt. This is where the majority Muslim north meet the mostly Christian south. Herders, mainly from the Fulani ethnic group who are Muslim, move around looking for pasture for their cattle, leading to conflict with the predominantly Christian farmers. More than 2,500 people were killed, according to data by armed conflict location. Now, that number doesn't include the close to 200 villagers in Yelwata in central Benue State who were recently killed in a series of attacks that began on June 13th. It's the deadliest wave of killings recorded so far this year, and Nigerian authorities say they've now launched a manhunt for the armed men who were behind them. Timothy Obiezu visited Yelwata and sent us this report.
Unprecedented and unprovoked. That's how locals describe the brutal onslaught that has left Yelwata reeling. For at least 4 hours last Friday, gunmen laid siege to this village, shooting, hacking, and setting corpses ablaze.
They came well prepared, shooting anyone in sight. We barely managed to escape.
But his 5 children and 2 other relatives were killed and burned right here. It's the deadliest assault in the region this year. State authorities put the official death toll at just 59. But village officials say they've recovered and buried at least 170 bodies so far. Right behind me, inside this house, lie the decomposing bodies of at least 10 people, still unburied. Locals say some of them had fled from another village, seeking safety here. Instead, they met a tragic end. The reason behind the attack is unclear, but Benue State has long been a flashpoint for violence over grazing land between armed herders and local farmers. Years of conflict have claimed thousands of lives. Just last month, at least 40 people were killed in another district. The latest massacre has forced thousands, especially women and children, to flee the village.
Let everyone at home and abroad know that there is war at home. There is war, there is genocide going on in Benue State and in Nigeria.
This is genocide to people who are not fighting, people who are just earning their life from their peasant farming. Why would you massacre them? For what?
Nigerian authorities have condemned the killings and launched special operations to track down those responsible. On Monday, Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, admitted that insider sabotage within the military may have enabled the attack. But for many here, protecting their community is priority, whatever the cost. Timothy Obiezu, Africa Matters, Yelwata, Benue State.
Now, the government is being blamed for not providing security and economic policies that address the needs of both herders and farmers, while the anti-open grazing legislation, which regulates livestock movement and promotes ranching, has been adopted in 12 Nigerian states. SBM intelligence reports enforcement has been inconsistent. Let's hear more from Confidence Makhari. He's a senior geopolitical analyst with SBM Intelligence, which is Nigeria's leading geopolitical research consultancy. He joins me from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Let's go straight into it. So, how can this cycle of violence and killings in Benue State be stopped? Just what's the solution?
The steps to end the Benue conflict are simple. Number one is to find the political will to end it. Number two is to identify the causes of the conflict. There have been a couple of a number of statements have been made out of the president's own media team attributing the security issues to clashes between farmers and herders, things that have to do with conflicts, political issues, and the likes. From what we heard from the king of the TV people in Benue, that's the Tortiv, that's James Ayase II. He said yesterday, it's not a clash. It's not communal clashes. This is simply people who are bent on genocidal attacks, people who want to carry out ethnic cleansing, people who come from different places across the Sahel to displace communities and to remove things, to remove people who are along the grazing routes in order for them to have leeway to graze their cattle. So it starts with honesty. It starts with identifying who these people are and blocking the ways in which they continue. And I will say this because the people who carry out the attacking are not indigenous to Benue State. Just like in Plateau State, where these attacks usually happen towards the end of the year, in Plateau, they usually come from neighboring Kaduna states where the security in that area is very large. So they come in at midnight, they kill, and then they go right back into Kaduna State. So it starts with number one, identifying where they are coming from, and number two, redigging the security architecture to be responsive to national security threats. The Nigerian security architecture today is so lopsided in favor of regime security, so much so that whenever we have these national security threats or incidents that happen, it is always unresponsive. So there is no response mechanism by which one should prevent this kind of attacks because the police, the DSS, other security services in the country, including the military, are heavily tilted towards supporting the ideas and the security and the protection of whoever the man in Aso Rock is. And as a result, national security takes a lower pecking order in the list of priorities of the government of the day.
Right.
This is not going to work, and it's even really sad that Benue is Nigeria's food basket, and it's a testament to the fact that they're not understanding the grand strategy of the need to protect Benue from falling into the hands of people who do not really know what it means to farm and feed the nation, and they're leaving it up to them. Is a greater testament to what I'm trying to say, that the whole security architecture is to focus on one particular aspect, which
Right.
is regime security,
Right,
leaving
confidence.
national
But
security to suffer.
allow me to interject because you see, every time both these sides go on a defensive mode, there are those who are being blamed for the attacks, and the ones being blamed for the attacks will say that they are equally targets of violence and land seizures as well. So, at the end of the day, these people are all Nigerians. So we need to come up with a solution that meets the needs of both communities, both groups. And some analysts, some experts have said that such a solution should be one that has both security and economic elements as well. I'm curious about what your thoughts are for tangible, permanent solutions that cater for the needs of both these sides.
I think I have to start by correcting the notion that both sides are actually Nigerians. And that's the first notion I have to correct. For many of the issues that happen in the North and in the North Central, reports after reports on Nigerian security services, as well as people who have been victims of these attacks, say that many of these people who do the attacking are not actually Nigerians. The Nigerians have Fulanis, just like many countries across the West Africa belt has Fulanis. And the way the Nigerian Fulani looks in physical appearance is different from the way the Fulanis across the Niger River from Futajalon down to Nigeria. It is different from how they look. So I think it's a little bit wrong to say that these people are actually Nigerians. Many of them are not. And so I'm not ruling out the question or the fact that some of them may have colluded with their Nigerian counterparts to carry these attacks. No, I'm not saying that. But I have to clear that notion that many of them are Nigerians. So they are not Nigerians, and that's exactly why many people in Benue State, especially the political rulers or the traditional rulers, will tell you that there is no both siding to this issue, in the sense that we have to find a solution, or what the president said in his presser, that we have to live in harmony. No, there isn't anything like that. And as to what people say, that this thing needs political solutions as well as military solutions, and all of these things are down to the fact that the first priority, which is the security of lives and properties, have not really been front and center. As to why this conflict evolved in the way it did, the people who are doing the attacking, they've said it several times, especially in Plateau State, that they were not really cool with the anti-open grazing law that the Benue State government and governments across the Middle Belt and the North Central embarked upon in 2020. Ever since, at least the past 2 decades, these killings have been going on. But when the anti-open grazing bill was signed into law across states in the Middle Belt and the South in 2020, between 2021 and 2022, these killings ramped up. And statements after statements, especially from Yeti Allah and the militant faction, have shown that they have said, the Fulani headers have said that for there to be peace, for there to be a moratorium on these killings, that the state governments in the Middle Belt have to repeal these anti-open grazing laws, which would mean that allowing cattle headers to ram their cattle into farms, destroy lives, destroy properties without compensation and with reckless abandon. And the governor said, no, these things cannot be. And so when we try to say, okay, there's a political solution to this thing, I'm sorry, from what I am saying, it is I think it is people being clever by half, by not really addressing the issue or by not really understanding that when you say one particular side is doing the killing, especially when they are not indigenous to that particular place, they're not from that area. I think it sort of begs the question on the kind of political solution we are looking for when we are not really being honest with what is really happening.
Right, and we could talk about some government interventions that have been made, because you mentioned the anti-open grazing legislation, which you have spoken so much into. But I'm also aware of a new federal ministry that was launched, I believe, last year by President Tinubu to basically address this situation and bring a permanent solution to it. So how far are we with the solutions? Because at the end of the day, all we need here are solutions, Confidence.
Okay, so one of the first things we need to understand is the fact that the people who you're giving these solutions to on ranching, for instance, are they really interested in ranching? And another thing we have to take into account is the federal government's seriousness in making sure that this plan on about livestock, as well as the whole ranching idea that came when the previous government of President Muhammad Buhari came up with the idea of the rural urban grazing scheme or something. So we do not really see that commitment, especially on the part of the federal government, to pour resources into it. As that's why, as of 2020, 2021, governments in the Northwest decide to take it as an initiative upon themselves and say, okay, if you're a header in the South and then you're facing attacks, you're facing persecution, it's fine, come up to the Northwest, we have lands, we're going to give it to you. But many of the headers actually went home, went back to the Northwest, and then they came back to the South, or they left the places where they initially went to, because according to them, it was only all publicity. There was no real interest in terms of the housing the headers, what they need, their school, the ranching, the health, and so many other things they need, educations, and every other business support they will need. They don't really have it. And so many of the people in the North Central are saying that this is not a burden that we have to carry on ourselves. At the very least, the federal government should be partnering with states that are interested in this, which was what the federal government said it was going to do in 2020 or 2021. But what the government of Tinubu has done, I think, in a way, was to repeat the same mistakes that the previous government did in terms of making a lot of show about the rhetoric about what they're going to do with the NLT, the National Livestock Transformation Plan, but the amount of money that needs, or the funds that needs to be gone, that needs to be soaked into this kind of plan. We haven't really seen it. We also really haven't seen the commitment from the federal government in making sure these things happen. And for what it is worth, neither the farmers nor the headers actually trust what the federal government is saying in terms of solution, because the government actually has a history of not putting its money where its mouth is, and as a result, whenever it says things like this, some people might adopt a wait and see approach, but more other people are like, "Nah, this is not something that we are going to sit around to do. So we have to take laws into our own hands."
All right, so Confidence, I'll ask you to stay with me, because we also want to look at other conflicts on the continent. Take Sudan, for instance. The civil war that began in April 2023 pits the Sudanese army against the paramilitary rapid support forces. Tens of thousands of people have been killed and millions displaced. It's also turned the largest agricultural producer in Africa to one that's on the brink of the worst famine in the world. Analysts say political and economic marginalization in Darfur, ethnic differences, armed rebellion supported by regional and international actors have all fueled the war. So yet again, Confidence, there we're talking about political and economic marginalization, but then again, we're talking about ethnic differences. So just what role does ethnicity play in conflicts across Africa, and how can African politicians use it to unite rather than to divide?
The way Africa is structured, I would think that one of the biggest mistakes of the Berlin Conference in between 1884 and 1885 was the causal way in which it overlooked conflicts on the continent and then drew lines on the sand and created the modern borders that we know in Africa today. So many of the countries many of the countries that were hastily put together to serve colonial needs have not been able to factor in that ethnic unity into a whole nation state, as away from the whole state model it has been. And we are seeing this, and I think one of the reasons why ethnicity plays a huge role is because of the lack of trust, the historical animosities that have been happening even before colonialism happened. And it also hasn't helped that the people who inherited the states that the colonialists set up have not made difficult choices of enlightened self-interest on one hand, and then building up societies that respect the rule of law. So more often than not, if you look at South Sudan, for instance, that mutual mistrust is leading to the stacking up of one particular army, of the national army with people from the president's side hoping to secure his rule. So we haven't seen that move from a state to building a nation state. So as a result, ethnic identities become so paramount that they become part of the daily life. So as to how politicians can harness these ethnic differences to their good or to create the state that they should be living in to forge a better world. I think it will start by recognizing the differences and respecting them. So more often than not, many politicians try to whip up ethnic sentiments for hold onto power. I think we will have to build democratic principles first of all. The rule of law is very, very important. The respect for institutions is very, very important. And this is, if you check many of the conflicts that are going on across Africa today, in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Nigeria, in several parts of the continent, even in downside, disrespect for rule of law is always one of the triggers towards conflict.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Confidence Makhari there, a senior geopolitical analyst with SBM Intelligence. Thank you for your time and your contribution. Still to come here on Africa Matters.
Care services are critical for the well-being of refugees globally. I am Darren Alan Cheyune at Kiriandongo Refugee Settlement in western Uganda, where lives are at threat after severe reductions in funding.
Well, needless to say, most people are uprooted from their homes by conflict. And Uganda hosts the largest number of refugees in Africa, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR. That's because it has opened its doors to close to 2 million people from its neighboring countries. But persistent international aid funding cuts are leaving the country burdened by its generosity. Darren Alan Cheyune brings us that story from one of the settlements in western Uganda.
Ruet Naliet has called the Kiriandongo refugee settlement home for 11 years. She fled the civil war in South Sudan, but life is getting harder here too for this mother of 8.
2014, I getting the sack for maize, I getting the cooking oil, I getting bean and salt also. Now, 10,000 is saying you sign. I sign, 10,000 cannot manage. 10,000. The whole thing is price is up.
That's about $3 a month and another $24 for her children. Uganda is Africa's biggest host with 1.9 million refugees across 13 settlements. United Nations officials say about 600 refugees, mainly from Sudan, continue to arrive here at Kiriandongo settlement weekly. Overall, slightly over 51% of the refugees in Uganda come from South Sudan. While 32% are from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, other refugees come from Burundi and Eritrea, according to the UN Refugee Agency. It requires $361 million this year, but only 24% is funded, following aid cuts driven by economic pressures, changing donor priorities, and internal political factors. This has forced them to reduce cash-based interventions from $100 to $68 for arriving refugees.
We have been giving rice and beans as the meals for lunch and supper. But now we are giving posho and beans, which is a serious impact on malnutrition in terms of health because the quantity of consumption has reduced.
And the funding gap of nearly $280 million is already being felt in this refugee settlement.
This health facility was previously offering a service turnaround time of about 3 hours, but with the reductions in medical staff and supplies, refugees here now wait much longer for treatment and critical patient care, leaving many in despair.
The International Rescue Committee health workers say they have more work with less resources, and about 20 people have died in recent months due to cancer, diabetes, and prenatal complications.
So when deaths do occur, we have to audit the deaths, review them, look at the preventable factors and address them. We're trying to do that. But there are some factors which are beyond our control. For example, if you need a medicine to reverse the disease process, you cannot do without it.
Humanitarian agencies have now launched emergency funding appeals while seeking new local partnerships and reallocating resources to address refugees' most immediate needs. Darren Alan Cheyune, Africa Matters, Kiriandongo, Western Uganda.
To Somalia now, where authorities are trying to persuade more people to add the country to their bucket list. The nation is experiencing a period of relative peace and stability, but as Mohammed Kahir reports from the capital, Mogadishu, the nation still suffers from a bad press.
Beautiful beaches, boat rides, and seafood on one of Africa's longest coastlines. These tourists are making the most of Somalia's largely untapped potential that is forcing many to reconsider long-held beliefs about the Horn of Africa.
All you see is the movies Black Hawk Down, Captain Phillips, the State Department advisories that say if you're gonna go, prepare a will because you'll die. And all these people just spreading fear, but you know, once I actually landed, I realized it's not all that serious. I mean, I've heard more gunshots in America than I have in Somalia the past 2 days.
At the National Museum, holiday makers can soak up the rhythms of Somali music and culture.
At no point have I felt unsafe. I felt welcome the whole time. So it really is about choosing a good group and a group that supports locals, because that's the point of sustainable travel, is supporting local communities so they can build their business into the future and grow tourism in Somalia.
For some visitors, the trip goes beyond tourism. It's also a chance to explore business and investment opportunities.
What I've noticed here in Somalia is that, for instance, mobile internet, it's very cheap. You know, it's like for, I think, $5 you can get a lot of data. So people have smartphones. They can leapfrog. You know, you can develop applications, you know, for people for education, for like to help them with like languages, also like, you know, to provide basically knowledge or like, you know, even payment infrastructure.
According to local tour operators, the number of foreign visitors, especially from Europe and the US, is growing every year.
Our booming months is starting with October, November, December, and January up to February.
Somalia joined the United Nations World Tourism Organization in 2017, and the government says it is working to revive the sector and persuade international tourists to add it as a holiday destination by 2030.
There is a huge potential investment in the tourism sector in the country, and as a government, we're working to put in place relevant policies which were already approved by the Parliament, including public-private partnership law, tourism investment law, and so on.
But security still remains a pressing issue for the Somali government. Before the civil war, this was a tourist hub for the region. Now, 3 decades after the breakout, local businesses hoping that Somalia can reclaim its former glory. Mohammed Kahir, Africa Matters, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Switching businesses, we head to South Africa now, which sells most of its shelled macadamia nuts to the United States. But farmers fear that President Donald Trump's decision to impose a 30% reciprocal tariff on the world's leading exporter by July, if they don't reach a deal, could drive them out of business. Brenda Radido reports on what their options are.
For 2 decades, macadamia farming has been a thriving business for Gene Likhanya. This year, he harvested 25 tons and plans to triple that number in the next 4 years due to global demand. He is among about a dozen farmers who've been exporting the nuts to the US for years. But President Donald Trump's plan to impose reciprocal tariff on imports from South Africa, aimed at reducing a trade deficit of nearly $9 billion, could hit their profit margins.
We'd always want to find ourselves trading in low tariff markets, meaning that, you know, it's money back into the farmers' pockets. The moment there's a 30% trade tariff, I think the figure I saw a few weeks back was that if Trump had to activate the 30% tariff, then we'd be paying close to 460 million rand worth of tariff at 30%. That's what a tariff means. That's R500 million out of our economy into the tariff.
That translates to about $28 million. Data from Macadamia South Africa shows that the industry employs more than 83,000 permanent and seasonal workers. And the 78 farm workers here could lose their jobs if tariffs are imposed in July.
This job has changed me from nothing, because I started working as in farming without any farming background.
Farming is very important for us, because if it hasn't for that, everyone will have been not working now. That will be a problem to the community.
Meanwhile, macadamia farmers are exploring the Asian market.
There's so much more we can do internationally or explore other markets. I mean, India has got 1.5 billion people that are also looking for macadamia. So there's always an alternative plan, but I trust that specifically with the US, I think that will be a matter that will be dealt with.
But until then, these macadamia farmers and their employees hope that both governments will strike a deal so that they don't pack it in. Brenda Radido, Africa Matters.
That's our show this week. Share your thoughts and suggestions about what's happening in Nigeria's Benue state, or ideas on what you'd like us to cover on YouTube or on X using the hashtag Africa Matters. Thanks for watching, and it's goodbye from me, Grace Kuria Kanja.